Hello everyone. Today I have prepared for you 10 scary stories from Reddit. Enjoy watching.
The first story. A few weeks ago, I was in the Denver airport. I got to the airport way early for my flight out of convenience. I walked the terminal with my bag and suitcase to get some exercise, checking the options for food. I decided where to get lunch, got my food, and swiftly walked back to where I had decided to sit. I stopped at my decided seat facing a window and set my food down, taking off my backpack and kinda turning around. I noticed this man standing close to another man sitting in a chair behind my seat in the next set of chairs, thinking they were together. When I sat down, the same man walked over to the doors in front of me a little to the left and stood facing the camera box, his face only inches from it. Weird, I take notice. He walked off, but came back quickly. At this point, I am taking more notice, checking his hands to see if he is touching himself or trying to take a picture of me. He is not, just standing there, nose literally almost touching the door. He disappears, and I am enjoying my food. An employee begins approaching me. I pause my podcast and greet him. He is obviously coming to speak with me. He asks me if I know the man and points towards the door he was standing. No, I do not know him. The employee: so I just wanted to let you know that he was following you. He had followed me through over half of the terminal. The employee said he saw the man notice me and basically take off running after me, and the employee followed us. The employee said he tried to cut in between the man and me, and that the man sped up so that the employee was unable to get between us. According to the employee, when I sat down, the guy sat behind me, and when I turned around, he stood up and jumped over to be standing beside the other guy, when I had thought that they were traveling together. When I sat down again, he came and stood in front of me, facing the door, paced off back to the other random guy, and then back to the door. He ran off when the employee came over to talk to me and asking if I knew the man. The employee had been watching where he went, walking off into a shop. He was going to go see what was going on, and that if anything else happens, to please alert an employee. Another employee, I think more security type, came to chat with me and just make sure that I was okay. At some point, the man behind me, the one that the man stood next to, also piped up that it was strange, and he had also been alerted by the man's movements and standing so close to him. During this, the original employee came back and let me know that he had boarded his flight. From the time the employee first approached me until the man boarded his flight was only about 10 to 15 minutes that this all took place. To the man in the airport, let's not meet. Picture of where he was standing in comments. Edit to add pic info.
The second story.
Something reminded me of this the other day, and while thinking about it, I thought it might warrant a post on here. Many years ago, I want to say around 1997-98, some friends and I went to visit a guy we knew who sold us weed. We knew him well enough and were friendly enough that we'd usually stay, smoke up, and have a few beers and shoot the breeze when we went to his house. It was a weekday night in early summer, so we were all standing around in his backyard talking. He lived in a particular subdivision here in town where a lot of the houses in the neighborhood had alleys behind them. Anyways, it was probably between midnight to 12:30 a.m., and as we stood there talking, we started to hear this faint music off in the distance. Didn't think anything of it at first, and we just kept talking. Then we noticed it getting louder, and I could identify the melody. It was FRLets by Beethoven, and it sounded even closer. Once it got close enough, you could clearly tell it was coming from an ice cream truck. And sure enough, down the alley behind this guy's house comes rolling an ice cream truck, maybe going like 10 miles an hour. The alleys are badly lit in that area, so we never got a clear view of the driver. After it drove on through, we all looked at each other and were like, What the hell is an ice cream man doing driving out after midnight with his truck music on, going down an alley no less? It was surreal enough, and us being stoned made it even more so. A few minutes later, we hear the music again, then it getting louder again, and the truck rolls back down the alley going in the opposite direction. Not like I was in fear for my life or anything, but just the weird spectacle of that, the incongruity of it made us all feel uneasy. I'm sure the weed didn't help that either. I still wonder what the driver was doing to this day. The third story.
Hello everyone, Major Lurker here, but I have decided to tell my story on Reddit to those who don't know me. I've scrolled Reddit for years now, but I've never actually set up an account, so here I am. I was 11 the first time I saw him. I had just gotten out of school, and I remember being hot and tired, but still excited because I had chore money in my backpack. $8 and some change, crumpled into my bag next to a mechanical pencil I found on the floor, that high-quality shit. That was enough for a Happy Meal. Nuggets, fries, a little toy I'd pretend I didn't care about, and a Sprite. Heaven. The McDonald's was only a few blocks from the school and up the hill from my apartment. My mom wasn't crazy about me walking around alone, but she also worked 2 jobs and couldn't pick me up most days. If I got home before 5 and didn't talk to strangers, she didn't ask too many questions. I kept my phone on 50% brightness to save battery, pretended like I was grown, and slid my earbuds in like I had somewhere important to be. That McDonald's became my little kingdom. Booths by the window, shoes kicked off under the table, watching YouTube Vine compilations on my cracked phone, like sipping a Sprite like it was champagne. I had just discovered Tumblr that year. I was reposting Melanie Martinez fan edits and thinking I understood what the word aesthetic meant. I was 11, going on 20, or at least I thought I was. That's probably why I didn't think it was weird when he sat near me. He didn't work there, I knew that much. He was too old to be hanging out during school hours and didn't have on a uniform. But the first time, I assumed he was waiting for someone. He had on this navy hoodie, sleeves pushed up, and a raggedy backpack next to him like he also just got out of school. He looked maybe 17, 18 at the oldest, with a face like he'd just started growing into it. Tall, white boy, deep voice. He looked like one of those SoundCloud emo rapper dudes. "You draw?" he asked, nodding at my sketchbook. I shrugged, trying to act unbothered. "Kinda," I said. "Not like for real for real." "You got talent," he said, and I felt my chest puff up just a little. Nobody ever said stuff like that to me, especially not older boys. At school, most of the guys my age were busy with whatever the popular trends were back then. This one, he looked me in the eye when he talked. Made me feel seen. The next time, he was already there. Same booth, same backpack, same easy smile when I walked in. "You again? You following me or something?" I laughed, a little too loud. He always knew what to say to make me feel grown. He'd ask about school, about my drawings, about music. Then he started asking other stuff, like what my background was, what kind of guys I liked. Said I didn't talk like the other black girls he knew, whatever that meant. I didn't even know how to respond to that one. But still, I came back, week after week, sometimes twice a week if I had extra change, and he was always there, like it was planned. The first few weeks, the conversations felt like a secret game. He'd show up at McDonald's like clockwork, sometimes early afternoon, sometimes after school, and we'd talk about everything but what I was really thinking about. The fourth story.
Hi guys, I know this isn't what is usually posted here, but a couple of years ago, I made a similar post and everyone was so helpful. I'm not sure if this is linked to the previous events I posted about, but someone, who I presume was living in my apartment complex, was hacking my speakers and other devices, playing disturbing songs through them at random times. Creepy songs that they would put at full volume and at all hours of the day and night. I know it doesn't sound scary, but it was to me. After months of torment, that situation eventually stopped, and I moved out of that apartment shortly after, so I never found out who it was. I don't know if what's happening now is connected, but it's strange, and I'm scared. I moved into a new apartment, townhouse, about 6 months ago. It's a nice place in a nice suburb that's meant to be very safe, and everything was normal. I was thriving until around 2 months ago. At the beginning, I just thought I was being silly or going crazy. There was little things like my front door being left unlocked overnight, even though I remembered locking it before I went to bed. Or I'd come home from work and the bathroom light would be on, even though I always turn off everything before leaving. At first, I just thought I was overstressed and being forgetful, but then I noticed things that couldn't just be in my head. I leave my keys on the side table just beside the door every night after I lock it, but one morning I woke up and they were on the floor by the back door. Another time I found my bedroom window cracked open. In my room, I have a cat who is very adventurous. I never open that window, or any window for that matter. At this point, I started to really freak out. I'm a young girl, I live alone, and I've always had these creepy things happen to me. It sent me into a spiral. I have my blinds down all the time, but my bedroom faces a narrow alley, and you can hear everything. People walking, talking, coughing, anything that happens in the alley. And lately, it's been feeling more deliberate. I don't know, I know I sound crazy, but I'm seriously freaked out. One night last week at 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping on my window. I froze. I couldn't move, trying not to scream and make myself known. But after a bit it stopped, and it was completely silent, but I couldn't fall back asleep. I thought it was in my head, or a tree branch or something, but the next morning I found 2 fingerprints smeared across my bedroom window from the outside. At this point, I told my landlord to see if he would put up cameras at the front of the house, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably just some of the kids from down the road. It wasn't, but tell me how that makes a fucking difference. So I installed a Ring camera at my front door 3 days ago. Since then, I've had 3 alerts of motion detected between 2 and 4 a.m. Every time the footage shows nothing, just an empty alley. But I'm getting paranoid that someone is standing just out of frame. And 2 days ago, my bedroom light was on when I came home from work. I haven't used any of the same devices I had during the speaker hacking thing a few years back. I changed my number, moved apartments, new accounts, everything. But now this is happening, and I can't shake the feeling that somehow the person found me again. Or maybe this is someone entirely new. Either way, I don't feel safe anymore. I'm jumpy all the time, sleeping with a light on, checking every lock multiple times at night. And part of me is terrified that whoever it is waiting for me to break psychologically. But now I have no clue what to do because I went to the police yesterday and they weren't helpful at all. They said they can't do anything unless I have proof. And honestly, I don't even know what that would look like right now. But I know something's not right. Please, if anyone can give me any advice of what to do, I can't afford to move, and I'm genuinely losing my mind.
The 5th story. So when I was younger, around 13 or 14 years old, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend, Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was this kind of guys' weekend coming-of-age thing. Something I'd like to do with my kids now. You know, fishing, cooking over fires, our first couple of beers, sleeping in tents and stuff like that. We drove pretty far up north, but this many years later, being 30, I can't remember where exactly we went. I know it was about 2 hours north of where I live now. We had parked Pat Dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush
and canoed a pretty far distance down a river to a lake and set up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could see this really old, abandoned-looking cabin. On the outside, it looked abandoned. The roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking and allowed us to go adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually allowed us to take one of the canoes across the water to check out the abandoned cabin. In hindsight, I don't think I would let me boys now go that far where I couldn't get to them in an emergency. But they were drunk, LOL. So being 13-ish-year-old boys, we did exactly that. We paddled across and checked it out. On the outside, this thing looked super decrepit. The front door was unlocked, and we went inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was certainly not abandoned and very lived in. It really freaked us out knowing somebody lived there, but was obviously nowhere nearby. There were porn magazines spread across the table, a bong, a tray full of weed, beer bottles everywhere, and on one of the shelves in the living room were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. Never pulled a trigger, just walked around the house with them like idiots feeling cool. We checked out different rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. Yes, I understand we technically committed a break and enter or trespass, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was somebody's hangout or something, but it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyways, one of the rooms had those mannequins that you see in a clothing store, but none of them were wearing any clothes, and they all had wigs, different lengths and colors. Something felt really off about that, and we decided we'd had enough and left after putting the guns back where we found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were. That evening, we fished some more, and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, 2 guys came by in a motorboat and stopped at our site. They were friendly enough, we all joked around a bit, and we had assumed they were just other campers or people out fishing, people like us. But then they invited us to their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, and then they still lingered, and things just started to feel weird. The 2 guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging weird looks. At one point, they even asked Pat and I if just the 2 of us would go hang out. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things were even more awkward. They stayed a while until it got dark, and then they left. That night, Pat's dad and uncle stayed up all night by the fire while we were to sleep in the tent. We didn't do much sleeping, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those 2 guys in that cabin and their wigs, porn, and guns. Eventually, we fell asleep. In the morning, everything was packed up, and Pat's dad cut the trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left immediately. Most of the trip back was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out by those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did ask exactly where that cabin was. I wouldn't want to go back there anyways. To the wig-wearing hermits in the cabin, please, let's not meet again.
The 6th story. I was around 9 years old when this happened. My parents had been separated for about 2 years. Before I get to the main part of the story, here's a bit of context. My mom, dad, and I were always very poor. At the time, my parents were trying to build a house in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our city, a place overrun by drug trafficking. But it was all they could afford. Otherwise, we'd be on the streets. The house was never finished. It had half-built rooms, piles of construction material everywhere, bare red brick walls with mold and water damage. It was crumbling, much like my parents' relationship and my childhood. My father was violent, unfaithful, and never helped with anything. Then one night, out of nowhere, I woke up to my mom shaking me awake, throwing a jacket over my shoulders, telling me we had to leave. We moved to another city and stayed with relatives for 2 years before coming back. That's when this story begins. My mom and I moved into a small place, a place my father didn't know. We later found out he had been asking around the city, trying to find out where we were. Eventually, he did. I was still very young, and despite everything, I begged my mom to let me see him. A court ended up granting him visitation rights every other weekend, and for about a year, that's what we did. By then, he had a new partner and still lived in that old, decrepit house. I spent weekends there. As awful as the place was, my younger brother also lived there, and we were close. My stepmom had a child with Dad while he was still with me.
The 7th story. Just posted about my lovely birthday and thought I'd unload another that happened the next week. Honestly, just writing it all out feels better than squashing it. I took on a house/pet sitting job for the weekend after my birthday. It was for a friend, and the dogs and cat are all super sweet, and I was happy to do it. I was already reeling from a scary encounter on my birthday, so it was welcome respite to have like a mini vacation where I had a house to myself. It was the first night there. I'd come back from a family member's birthday party, and it was too early to curl my hair, so I was watching Jenny and Georgia on the living room TV. For reference, the TV was next to the front door, with the guest bathroom I was using within 3 feet. It was about 10 p.m., and I paused the show to pee. Dogs were asleep on the other side of the house, both older and one with mobility issues, and shortly after locking the door and sitting down, I heard something. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, as I've been through several break-ins and attempts. But then I heard the door open and footsteps on the laminate flooring. If you know how loud. Then I heard a man's cough, distinctly, maybe 15 feet from where I was. I frantically texted my mom to call the cops, thinking I should be as quiet as possible. But when she didn't answer and I heard his footsteps coming closer, I panicked and called myself. Keep in mind, after my first situation, I became very particular. When I house sit, the first thing I do is check all windows and doors and secure all entry points, as my dad kind of taught me growing up. I know everything was locked, but I'm sobbing on the phone and panicking on the toilet seat, hoping the cops get there in time and I don't end up another statistic. Then I hear the footsteps recede and the back door close. The operator informed me the cops were there, but I'd have to come out to let them in. I've got some really bad stories, but unlocking that door, running to the front door to unlock it, and basically falling outside was up there for terrifying moments in my life. They checked the house. They didn't believe me. The back door was not particularly secure, as it's the same kind I have on my bedroom. It's the kind you can turn the lock and close behind you. So of course the place was locked up. Once again, slept with the knife under my pillow. And that's for the maybe 45 minutes I actually slept. To the man who barged into the house I was watching, I don't know who you are or what you wanted, but I'd like to never meet you.
The 8th story.
I live alone in a little house in a big city. Kind of a rough around the edges neighborhood, but I've lived in the area most of my life, and my block is tight-knit in spite of half of it being vacant or abandoned. It's also a city that, like many others, tragically has a lot of folks living out of cars and RVs trying to eke out an existence. So I shouldn't have been too surprised when, back in October last year, I got a text from a neighbor, "You might want to take a look out your back window." About 10 feet away was an enormous 40-foot motorhome in the dead-end alley, sitting right on the edge of the small cliff that is my unfenced backyard. Having lived in urban areas my whole life, I'm no stranger to odd happenings immediately outside my window, but this did feel a little more intrusive than living in a ground floor apartment, no thanks to my back window being my bathroom window. It sat there for a few weeks without anyone paying much mind. A few neighbors speculated it might have been someone working on a couple demolition and construction projects in the neighborhood, a supervisor from out of town, perhaps. Whomever it was, I didn't really mind as long as there wasn't any mess, though I was slightly worried a wrong move would end with someone or the whole vehicle rolling off the retaining wall and potentially crashing through my wall. Of course, there was the small fact that half the block now couldn't access the alley. My city is very particular about removing vehicles if someone is potentially living in them, and after a few roundabout calls to the parking department, I and my neighbors were told we needed some evidence it was a hazard or abandoned. So, I grabbed a cheap webcam off Amazon and popped it in my window, and went on with my life. About a week later, after some friends over for dinner had left, I thought I'd check and see if the camera had picked up anything. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. Like clockwork, every night around midnight, the lights in the RV would flick on in the otherwise pitch-black night, a couple of cars would pull up behind, and the occupants would unload several very full garbage bags into the RV. Then these shadowy figures would creep down the yard of the vacant house next door, into mine, and methodically circle my house, shining flashlights in each window. Cars would come and go all night until about 5 a.m., then all was business as usual during daylight hours. Worth mentioning that my house is essentially a studio apartment on top of a garage, built into a slope. My bed is about 10 feet from those windows. Also worth mentioning, my neighborhood had an alarming rash of about 20 armed home invasions the summer before, or the arson on an occupied house across the street a few months earlier. Vulnerable was an understatement of how I felt. I ended up moving most of my furniture around my bed as a makeshift barricade. I called 911. They were a bit incredulous. Nothing was actively happening as I called. This wasn't an emergency. I can call the non-emergency line in the morning if I want to speak to an officer or detective. The next morning, I felt it was prudent to bring in any yard tools that would make a tempting window breaker and double-check the back porch and security flood had working bulbs. And just my luck, I managed to completely break both fixtures in the process. As soon as I walked out my back door, the RV's door swung open and a man and woman stepped out. They were dressed in t-shirts and shorts despite the 39-degree weather and looked like zombies. I waved. They didn't. They stared past me. I quickly retreated back inside to keep an eye remotely, but not before noticing something even more startling. The RV had about 6 security cameras mounted on it, 3 of which were trained on my back door. I was watching them, they were watching me. After a day or two more of this, I had become fully nocturnal, leaving all the lights blazing all night, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. This was both mostly benign and deeply unsettling. Texting friends and family for hopes of reassurance, well, didn't do much. They're probably just trying to find a quiet place away from the encampments. Maybe they work a night shift. If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want a security camera? You have one on your house. Okay, maybe I was being paranoid. My neighbors were mostly preoccupied with the alley being blocked and subsequent missed deliveries. And it's not like the city was going to do much anyway. The cars kept going and going all night. The people with flashlights stayed just outside the edge of my yard, but I'd catch the occasional flash through the window. After being reluctant to leave the house alone and my cat, I had to leave for an in-person work meeting. While I was gone, my camera pinged me about activity. The RV folks had set up stakes around my property and were wrapping yellow caution tape around my yard, across the alley, and set up a barricade of traffic cones around their vehicle. This was just getting weird. By this point, a few of us on the block started a group text to keep tabs on things. One neighbor, a few houses down, caught the female half of this duo in her backyard with a chainsaw, limbing their oak tree in daylight hours. They confronted her, and she gave the same treatment as me, a mute, 1,000-yard stare. That neighbor called it in, and I watched a few officers poke around for a minute, clearly puzzled by the barricades and tape. I thought there might be some imminent resolution, then they booked it back to their squad and took off with lights and sirens. There was a shooting a few blocks over. I assume they got called to. Another night goes by, punctuated by the RV's alarm going off every couple hours and the engine revving menacingly, though nothing out of the ordinary, at least this ordinary. I take my mid-morning nap I'd become accustomed to over the past week, only to be woken by loud, angry yelling. I pull up the camera feed. Out back is another neighbor, the goofy dad come ex-naval officer, venting his frustrations to a police officer who's banging the RV door with a baton demanding the occupants come out. There's a brand new sports car parked behind, one that I'd barely made out on my cheap camera's night vision. I carefully left out the front so as not to be conspicuous and circled up the mouth of the alley to speak with the officer and explain my story in a near stream of consciousness ramble. Did you see them leave? Nope, I played back to camera. The sports car showed up around 5:30 a.m. and nobody had left since. He said the car was too new to have a current registration and the RV was registered to a deceased person 4 counties away. Suspicious, but nothing outright criminal, but he'd ticket it with a 24-hour tow notice. As he was typing up the ticket, the sports car came barreling down the alley in reverse, nearly plowing into the cruiser, and I was told very sternly to leave immediately. I ran home and pulled up a police scanner feed to try and glean some information. They were calling for a gang officer, a domestic violence unit, vice squad, and CSI. So my gut feeling wasn't too far off the mark. Later that night, the officer called me asking to send him the entirety of my footage. I asked if there was anything he could divulge about what happened. He said, "I can't tell you much, but this was a bad dude and he's going away. We towed the car as evidence, but we'll have to wait until morning to get a big enough truck to move the RV." To say I slept well that night was an understatement. But that calm was shattered literally early the next morning as I heard glass breaking outside. 3 masked men were breaking into the RV with crowbars. One was up on a ladder, sawing through the roof with an angle grinder. I frantically called 911, struggling to explain the context of what was going on, once again met with a verbal eye roll from the call taker. "Is it your RV? No? Sir, you can't report a stolen vehicle that isn't yours." I hung up and...
The 9th story.
I was debating whether or not to put this here because I usually don't ever post anything. But a friend of mine convinced me, as it perhaps could be helpful to others in similar situations. The title is a supposition, as I genuinely have no idea how to explain this. For context, a few months ago, I had driven to a gas station on a highway near where I live because I had to deliver a package via a locker. The road is a smaller one, 2-way, and there's a gas station on each side. I parked at the one on the side of the road I was driving on, and then crossed on foot to go to the other, where the locker was. The road was fairly empty, as it was close to midday on a Saturday, if I recall correctly. However, the place the locker was located in had shut down permanently, and I couldn't access it anymore. So I crossed again and started going back to my car. By the time I had done this, a truck belonging to a private postal company in my country had parked in the same gas station I did. Again, it wasn't a weekday, so the place was closed and there was no one else nearby. The driver got out of the truck and came towards me, and he proceeded to ask me if we could connect the battery in his truck to the one in my car, as his had stopped working. I immediately refused. 1, because I don't know the first thing about doing that, and 2, because the whole interaction just seemed off to me, and I generally felt uncomfortable giving a complete stranger access to my vehicle. I apologized and quickly got back to my car, which was luckily not too close to him. I couldn't even put my key in the ignition before the truck had left, getting back onto the highway. Now again, I'm no car expert, but even I know that if your battery is dead or very close to dying, there's no way you would start your vehicle back up again after it being turned off, especially a truck. It would at least take him some 4 or 5 tries to get it to turn on, if it did, which is unlikely in most cases. It didn't even register to me that he could have had some bad intentions until after I was long out of there and heading home. I don't know if all the TV I watch is getting to me or what, but everyone I've told agrees with me that it was really weird, and I did good not giving him the time of day. I do wonder if he could have just been in need of genuine help, but TBF, I have no idea.
Anyways, please, if you're ever alone on the road, do not interact with strangers who stop by and do not get out of your car unless absolutely necessary.
The last story.
When I was 8, I lived on a very small cul-de-sac on a lake. It was the fall, and the lake was made up of mostly seasonal houses, so my street and a few others were the only ones with year-round residents. Due to this, everyone knew everyone, and you could always identify who was who simply based off the car they drove. I'd just gotten off the bus from school and threw my backpack in my front yard and started playing some basketball. Our basketball hoop was in the street, so if a car came by or something, you'd have to stop playing so they can get through. My older siblings were off at their clubs, so the only other person home was my mom, evidently by her car in the driveway. I know she knew I was home because she looked at me in the driveway, smiled, and turned around to go back to her laptop to work. After playing for a bit, a car turned down my street who I didn't recognize. This was weird for a few reasons. 1, my street was made up of people who didn't like visitors. 2, it was midday. Everyone on my street was working. And 3, their plates were from another state. While I recognized it was weird, I thought nothing of it and moved so they could drive down the street. After all, sometimes people just liked seeing the lake in the off-season and need somewhere to turn around. My house was the first one on the street, so I figured in a minute I'd see him turn back up around to leave. And I was right. He came coming back around, but he stopped. I was standing across the street from my house and the basketball hoop when he rolled down his window. "Hey kid, let me see the ball." I handed him the ball, and he tried to shoot it over his car into the basket. "Damn, I missed. Go get it and let me try again." I remember thinking he was cool. He was probably early 30s and very charismatic. Despite it being fall, he was dressed like it was summer, like he was going to a frat house for a party. When I went to go retrieve the ball, I bent over and grabbed it from the ground, and I heard a camera. He had obviously taken a picture of me. Even at 8, some alarm bells started going off, but they were dismissed because of how the guy looked. I went back around the car and handed him the ball, except this time he grabbed my wrist. The ball fell, and he was just staring at me, his grip getting tighter and tighter. He then took his other hand and started to try and interlock his fingers with him. "Just let it happen, kid. Enjoy this. And don't even think about screaming for help. Nobody will hear you." I was confused because my mom would have heard me. She was working from home and could be outside in seconds. I resisted him holding my hand for what felt like minutes when he slowly started to put his foot on the gas. I was forced to kind of side sprint, and he got what he wanted. He was holding my hand. It was obvious he was filled with excitement and pleasure from holding my hand. His eyes rolled back. He pressed his legs together. His tongue was out. It was disturbing. I thought to myself that I can either scream and hopefully live or stay silent and probably die. So I screamed for my mom. He said, "Oh shit," and let go and sped off. The roads are tight where I lived, and I remember when he was turning off my road to the main road, he ran over a patch of the lawn across the street, probably going 40 miles per hour on this 10-mile-per-hour road. My mom came running out and saw him taking off, trying to get his plate, but couldn't. I explained to her inside what happened, and then my dad later when he came home from work. My dad was a volunteer EMT on the weekends for the town, so he knew a lot of the police and told them what happened. They said they didn't get any other reports from the town and checked up with surrounding towns to see if they had anything, and there was nothing. My mom told my dad that she had seen an unfamiliar car going up and down the road lately, but thought nothing of it. We concluded he was probably scouting the area, as it was obvious our house had children in it and the other houses were not occupied midday. He probably thought my mom's car was stationary because it was old, beat up, and hardly used with her working from home. We thought that was it, but something weird happened that night. While my siblings should have typically been home, it was a Friday night and they wanted to stay at friends' houses. My parents were quicker to approve this than usual because they thought the less children at home, the less that would be at risk.
Since they were older and this predates the always online era, they would have wanted to be outside late, and they probably didn't want to listen to the whining that would ensue when my parents said they couldn't. With the police and my parents aware of what the guy looked like, we settled down for the night. Our house is a single story, and I shared a room with my brothers, with my parents' room at the end of the hallway. With my brothers out and me spooked, my parents closed my curtains and set up the TV from the living room in my room so I had something to distract me and light up the room. It was probably 1 a.m. I was watching King of the Hill on Adult Swim. My parents didn't know Cartoon Network wasn't all day. I was facing away from my window because the TV was across from it, when behind me I heard knocking on the window. I froze for a second and thought it might be one of my siblings trying to get into the house. They'd sneak out to smoke and would knock on the window sometimes for me to unlock the front door. I didn't want to take a chance with me being spooked, and with it being the weekend, I didn't really care for waking up my parents because my sibling wouldn't get in trouble and it was better safe than sorry. So I got up and turned on every light I could on the way to my parents' room, including my parents. It woken my mom up, but not my dad. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her. She was having a hard time adjusting to the light from waking up, so I turned it off. My parents had 3 windows in their room, one facing the front yard, one facing the side yard, and one facing the backyard. The side yard and backyard have some thick woods behind them that separate us from our next-door neighbor. The backyard window also had our basement door going to it. It was slanted up, so when standing at the top of it, you could see into their window. In the fall and winter, they wouldn't close that curtain because they didn't worry about anyone doing that. They only would in the summer and spring because sometimes the seasonal house's kid residents would shine lights into people's windows to wake them up as pranks. When explaining to my mom I had a knock on the window, she got up, and as she walked towards me, there he was looking into the window. She screamed, which woke my dad up. The man outside yelled out, "I just wanted to hold his hand." My dad grabbed the signed baseball bat he kept in his room and stormed outside in nothing but his underwear. He was gone. My mom was watching outside the window and said he ran into the woods. These woods weren't known for any big animals, so he was unfortunately safe. We called the police, and after that night, we got some basic home security systems. Everyone on my street knew what happened, and my parents invested into more indoor stuff for me and my siblings to do, which is how I got my first Xbox. Nothing ever happened again. Nothing like that happened anywhere near us. All I could assume was the man went back to the state that the license plate on his car was from.
Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments, and I will be very glad to receive your subscription to the channel.